How's it going, everyone? Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about what makes a game feel clunky or not, and I specifically want to talk about Melee and Ultimate in the context of the Smash community because it's funny, different depending on who you are, you might pick up Melee and say, "Wow, this game feels really clunky," or you might pick up Ultimate and say the same thing, but of course they're clunky for different reasons. And so I wanted to kind of go through why I think that might be and kind of explain a bit more of like why that is. So first off, we have to acknowledge there's the flat screen era and then the pre-flat screen era. And the reason why that's significant is because flat screens introduce a whole lot of inconsistency and, display lag and a bunch of things that were just not present in the CRT era. Right? So like until like 2005 or something like that, before it was really mainstream, every TV was completely lagless and took up a lot of room. And then with the advent of more flat screen LCDs, they took up less space, they were lighter, they used newer tech, but they weren't as performant, they weren't as responsive. They had screen burn, a bunch of issues that were just never as well, I wouldn't say never, but certainly not as much of an issue with CRTs, right? So when games were made for CRTs, of course you had the early games that used pixel art. It was meant to kind of be seen with the lines so that things looked a little blurrier and it looked a little more complete. And then with the advent of progressive scan and non-interlaced footage, you have things more sharp, you have higher resolutions. But with that, there was a cost of the timing it took to take analog signal and convert it to digital, right? You had things like that. And then in the future, of course, you have HDMI, which helps with that. But even still, the best TVs can still have some performance issues, right? So that's kind of the trade-off. So now to go back to the context of Smash and just like timing, right? So with this new advent of flat screens, you have this new issue of inconsistent timing. So think about like the rhythm games like Guitar Hero that came out around that time. That was they were pretty popular and they came out around the time of these new flat TVs. And so like in Guitar Hero 3, for example, you'll have like a lag slider. So you could basically correct based on how the input delay of the screen. And so that was a great feature, but it only had to be a feature because of the new tech. And then eventually they came up with I say that but at some point games started incorporating input buffer as a sort of solution to, let's say you played at a friend's house and your timing felt off compared to when you were at your house. Well, that basically added some leniency. So you didn't have to press A or whatever button on the exact right frame. You just kind of had to press it in a certain window, a little before, a little after the input would have executed. And so that was their way to kind of compensate for it, right? But of course, it has unintended side effects as well. So if you double input, it's going to do a double action instead of, you meaning to just do one. So personally, I prefer no lag, and I think most people will agree. But where there has to be lag, there has to be delay. That's where they would argue. Well, that's where buffering is helpful. And so I would say if it was up to me, no lag, no delay, no buffer at all, right? Like think about real life. If you're to open a door, you don't have to like wait a second before you can walk through. You can open the door and walk through immediately. If there was a delay and you open the door, you just run into the door. But if your whole life you open a door and knew you had to wait a full second before you walk through the door, then you kind of have that expectation. But obviously in real life, that's not really how it works. So I kind of wish games would run more like how your interactions are in real life, instantaneous, super responsive. So Melee is a game that has no buffer whatsoever, and there's almost like very little lag, like maybe 1 or 2 frames, typically, right? So Ultimate, on the other hand, has like 6 frames of delay. And then on top of that, it's got something like 8 frames of input buffer. I could be wrong on that on the exact numbers, but it's something like that. And then Melee has none. So if you're used to CRT, playing on consoles from the pre-flat screen era, and you're gonna basically prize responsiveness and good timing over all else. Whereas if you play post the advent of flat screen, you're gonna assume the game will be more understanding if you don't get the input exactly right due to the nature of the games that have incorporated this buffer system. So I guess what I would say is, in my experience, buffer mechanics have hurt more than they've helped. And if they have to be included, do it like Rivals of Aether does it and have a really conservative small number like 3. But I would still say best case scenario, let every user customize it for themselves. Let them toggle rumble if they don't want rumble, let them toggle tap jump for platform fighters, and let them adjust the number of input buffer frames that they want. That would be the perfect solution. It would allow everyone to kind of customize the window of timing for their particular liking. If they want a really generous input buffer window, they can do it. If they don't want any buffer, they can set it to 0. And I think that would solve the issue of people thinking Melee was, clunky or Ultimate's clunky. If you could just adjust that, I think that would solve the issue for a lot of people, depending on whether or not you're used to a CRT or you're used to a more modern display. So anyway, little discussion there over, but I hope that clarifies why players might feel like when they play Melee it's super unresponsive. In reality, it's actually like 6 times more responsive than Ultimate, something like that. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.